Okay, so we are now in the lesson 7, the fundamental schools of thought in explaining the causes of crimes under the theories of crime causation. So your presenter, once again, is the Relito Bernard G. Delizo, known as Sir D or Tatay D or Dr. D. So the fundamental schools of thought in explaining the causations of crimes are the same with the fundamental schools of thought in criminology. You have the classical, the neoclassical, and the positive schools of criminology. What are the objectives of this lesson? Well, at the end of the lesson, the learners are expected to explain the concepts of the three schools of thoughts, and they are expected to discuss the explanation of crime in each of the pioneers of the schools of thoughts. So these are the fundamental schools, as we have mentioned a while back. You have the classical, the neoclassical, and the positive schools of thoughts in criminology, or explaining the causes of crime. In the classical school, if we go back to your introduction to criminology, we have the pre-classical school, which focuses on the demonological as well as spiritual aspect of crime causation. But there were no scientific approach as to the explanation of, we call it, why people commit crime. So this classical school actually developed during the Enlightenment. So what is that Enlightenment period? The Enlightenment period was the time when people began to think away from the Bible, when people began to think away from the religions, when people began to think away from their traditions, from their cultures, and from their spiritual belief. That's why they call that the age of enlightenment. So people say you have to be enlightened that what is going on in our lives is not actually attributable to some spirits or to your religion, but rather it is attributed to your own free will. That is the idea of the classical school. So basically, the classical thinkers, they were thinking that the penalties or the punishment of those people who have committed sins or crimes in the olden times was very harsh. You know, the punishment given to them was very harsh. So in response to that, the classicalists or they come up with this classical school of thoughts in which they tried now to react or to go against the excessive and cruel punishments that is or that were we call it enforced during the pre-classical school. So the classical school, the most well-known among the classicalists in criminology, we have Cesar Beccaria or Cesare Marquis de Beccaria, an Italian criminologist and economist. So what was the contention of Cesar Beccaria? He argued for more humanitarian forms of punishment, meaning he was not amenable to death penalty and the harsh punishment or the corporal punishment like torture and similar things that were instituted during the pre-classical school. So he said that I am against death penalty, and the punishment should fit the crime and not be excessive. Meaning, he was pointing to the lex talionis law or the law of retaliation, as well as the an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth law in the olden times, where people, when you committed a robbery or theft, the penalty would be the same. Okay? Whether you have stolen a large amount or a small amount or a small property or a large property, this punishment would be the same as either death penalty or by we call it mutilation of the hand. So those are the things that the classicalists, particularly Beccaria, go against with. So he wrote an essay on crimes and punishment. And he mentioned about the inhumane treatment of criminals during his time. So he said the punishment should fit the crime, meaning if you have stolen a small amount, then the penalty to be imposed should be not that as severe as those who have stolen greater amount. So that was the idea of Cesar Beccaria. So he said that crimes are more effectively prevented by the certainty than the severity of punishment. So he is more on the deterrence, which we have already discussed earlier, that not the severity of punishment, but rather it should be the certainty, meaning that a person once committed an offense, surely he will be punished. That is the idea, rather than the severity or the harsh punishment. And of course, we have Jeremy Bentham in his book, The Principles of Morals and Legislation. He was talking about injustices. He was talking about, we call it biased treatment of, we call it, of criminals and the people in general. So Jeremy Bentham was another classical pioneer, an English philosopher, economist, and theoretical jurist in utilitarianism, where he said that mankind was governed by two sovereign motives, the pain and pleasure, meaning he was talking that we behave based on the pain and the pleasure that we get, whether which one is heavier, the pain or the pleasure. So he was thinking about the hedonistic principle in which, according to him, we uh, we behave depending on the pleasure or the pain that we get from out of that behavior or action. And also, he talks about the principle of utility or the utilitarianism, wherein when you say utility or utilitarianism, he was saying that the laws of the land should be for the goodness or for the happiness of all the people, not for few people. Or meaning he was saying that a law should be usable by most number of people rather than the few who are only we call it enjoying the laws of the land, just like the royal family. So he was saying that the royal families are not treated, okay, severely as the treatment to we call it the poor people. So that's the idea of Jeremy Bentham. And further, Bentham came up with that hedonistic calculus. The word calculus, it means you are calculating. Okay, that's don't be so much technical. Don't go to mathematics to understand the word calculus. We're just going to take the simpler or the simplest definition of calculus, in which the simple we call it weighing of the gains and the pains that a person can take out of a particular action or behavior, or shall we say, the commission of a crime. So, a hedonistic calculus or the felicity. When you say felicity, it's something like in your heart. Okay, something like what comes in your heart, or how do you see things like that. So it involves the weighing of pleasure versus pain. So free will allowed people to make calculated and deliberate decisions related to the pursuit of their own happiness. So he was saying that we have that free will and we have that rationality to think what is good and what is not good for us. So practically, people choose things that are better than the good things, or the good things over the bad things, or between good and good, he's going to choose the better one. If between bad and bad, he's going to choose the lesser evil or the lesser bad, something like that. So this is the calculation. Something like when you do something or when you commit a crime or when you choose to do something, you are thinking of how long will it take. So you consider the duration of this thing. So how long will it take? Okay? If I'm going to do this thing, if I'm going to commit a crime, okay, if I'm going to be in prison, how long will I be in prison? Like that. And the remoteness, how soon will occur? How soon meaning will it come tomorrow or earlier than tomorrow? Am I going to we call it to reap the harvest sooner than I expect. Something like, just like us Filipinos, na? Filipinos, ang usapan natin ay yung madaling pagkapirahan. Because people are considering the remoteness or the soonest possible of occurrence of something. Kaya ang pinag-uusapan nyo rito ay yung mga slow investment. Ang tendency niyan, kokonti lang ang mag-invest. So, ang gagawin ng iba, mas pipiliin nila yung mga bagay-bagay na quick money. Kaya maraming naluloko. Just like farming. In farming, you have to wait for 3 to 4 months before you can harvest. That's why people will tend to get away from farming and to be employed instead, because the money, when you are employed, it will be sooner than waiting for the harvest. That's the idea. Okay? And then what else? The purity or how free from pain is it? Meaning, ano dito ang mas mahirap na gawin? So, between farming and being employed, people will choose being employed rather than farming. Because in farming, there should be patience, there should be perseverance, you have to wait. So it's difficult, you have to watch for your farm, for your palay, if you're planting palay. Kailangan mong magpatubig, kailangan mong magtanggal ng mga damo, kailangan mong mag-fertilizer, alagaan mo yung palayan. Okay, you have to wait. And eventually, kung tinamaan pa yan ng bagyo, just like what happened recently, so tinitignan ng tao yung kanyang action. Kaya yung mga iba, they opted to sell their farmlands. They opted to go to the urban areas because making money in the cities or in urban places is much easier than making money in rural areas. So that's the idea of these people. And the richness, to what extent will it lead to other pleasures? Meaning, if I'm going to do this thing, what are the other pleasures or benefits that I could gain? So they are going to weigh these things. Okay? So that's the idea of that hedonistic calculus. So people or individuals will try now to weigh what other benefits that I could get from this. Just like, say, for example, between we call it entering the tri-bureau. Well, practically, if you are going to apply in the PNP, it is much more difficult than applying in other agencies. However, there are, we call it benefits that you can get from the PNP, which you cannot get from the other bureaus. Because the Philippine National Police is a much larger organization than the two other bureaus. Therefore, in the PNP, there are more privileges and there are more chances and opportunities of better career paths. Okay, that's the idea. That's why if they will ask me, well, it's easy. The job in the BFP may be easier than the job in the PNP, but somehow there are more benefits that you can get from the PNP, something like that. Okay, that's my own opinion. Okay. Then what else? Intensity. How powerful, meaning what would be the impact of the thing that I'm going to do? So something like I have given you an example a while back between entering the PNP and the other tri-bureau. Well, we cannot get away from the idea that the common people will give more respect to the police officers rather than the fire officers or the jail officers. Well, that's in the Philippine setting. Okay, so that's why many of the criminology graduates would rather go to the PNP rather than go to the other bureaus. And more often than not, criminology graduates will choose to join the PNP rather than the two tri-bureaus because of the innate or the inherent status of being a police officer. If I'm going to ask you today, you criminology students, then perhaps 95 to 95%, 98% or 99% of you would say that you would like to be a police officer rather than to become a fire officer or a jail officer. Well, that's the reality because of the intensity of the status or the image of being a police rather than being with the other tribunals of the government. What else? Certainty. So, in Tagalog, naniniguro, kailangan ko ng sigurado. Okay? If I'm going to do this, gusto ko yung sigurado. Okay? Nakakasiguro ba ako dyan na makukuha ko yan? That's why, swindlers, usually, they show checks, okay, amounting to thousands of pesos as a result of their investment in a particular networking company, just to show to the possible client and members, okay, that it is very certain that your money will yield more. So when people will see evidence, they will see check amounting to thousands of pesos. Well, they are enticed also to join that networking company because of that. We call it tendency of certainty, or the probability that their money invested on that particular networking company will yield more than what will yield if that money will be invested in other line of businesses. So what else? The extent, how many people are attracted. You know, between, we call it, Filipinos in general, we would rather go to a certain store or certain center where more people are going rather than less people, okay? Because we thought that if there are more people in that group or organization, we normally think that it is the right thing. Or as another thing, when you say how many people are attracted, something like, is it, we call it, is it admirable by other people, or how many people will admire what I will be doing? Just like in the utilitarian principle, in which the law should be for the greater number of people rather than the less number of people. Okay, so those are the things that Jeremy Bentham would like to, Jeremy Bentham emphasized during his time, that we behave based on our hedonistic calculus, based on the pain and the gain, or the pleasure that we get from an action that we are going to choose to do or not to do. So what else in the classical school of criminology? In the classical school, the classicalists were emphasizing the equality of all people, because in the olden time, in the pre-classical school, most of the governments in the world were ruled by monarchs or by kings, by queens. And, you know, in the kingdom, practically the royal families enjoy much of the laws than the ordinary people. The people in the higher stratum of society enjoy much, or they enjoy their status, or the laws are more or less favorable to them. That's why Jeremy Bentham, and particularly Cesar Beccaria, was saying that the laws should not be for the royal people, for the rich, for the wealthy people, but the laws to be legislated should be for all the people, including the punishment of criminal. So the harshness of punishment should not be only for the poor people, but even the middle class and the upper class people should be dealt with. So we have now what you call the equal protection of the law clause that we have today. So people had to know what categories of conduct were punishable. So they say, you have to teach us, you have to teach the people. Let the people know what are the laws and what are the violations, what are the prohibitions, and they should know the consequences of those acts. Because if they will come to know that the consequence will be like this, so they have that freedom to choose. So that's according to the classical thinkers. Punishable conduct would only be that which encroach on someone else's freedom in violation of the social contract. So you might be thinking, what is that social contract? The social contract of the government is about something like this. Ang mga tao ay nag-organize ng gobyerno, so they agreed that the government that they're going to create will protect them. And people from among them ay pipiliin nila to serve them as the government people. So the government now will protect people economically, politically, okay, and every kind of protection, including health and everything, and the people will pay their taxes. So that is now the social contract, as we are saying. So they are saying that there should be no punishment beyond the laws created by the people. So in the social contract, laws are created, and according to the classicalists, we should not go beyond the law. So punishable things, punishable actions and behaviors are only those that are stated in the law. Otherwise, do not punish a person if the law does not talk about it. So something like, do not include what the law excludes, but do not exclude what the law includes. So something like that. Okay. So what else in the classical school? In the classical school, your status in life, whether you are wealthy, you are poor, you are royal family, or you are a member to a royal family, or you are educated or not. So it should not be a factor in we call it meting punishment, just like the manyanita issue sa ating bansa, no? So alam natin si manyanita. You might be wondering, sir, ano bang ibig sabihin ng manyanita? Manyanita, it means early morning. Manyana means morning or tomorrow. So when you say manyana habit, meaning bukas na. So when you say manyana, it's either talking tomorrow or morning. So pag sabi mong manyanita, that is early morning. Among the high-ranking officers kasi class, no, they celebrate their birthdays during the early time of the morning. In fact, they start from 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock early in the morning. Kaya tawag nila doon ay manyanita, okay? For your information, if you do not know yet. So manyanita, that issue, kung saan si Chief PNP ngayon ay he was right away exonerated by the president. And here comes a driver, a vendor who were, we call it, apprehended for the same violation of the COVID-19 or the IATF law. So people were criticizing the government for, we call it, since then or since that time, the Manyanita issue, they were saying that because of his status as a general, that he was not or he was already he was outrightly exonerated by the government, by the president, like that, no? So the classical school was saying that there should be equality of the law regardless of the status of an individual in our society, and people have free will, and those who have violated the law were motivated by personal needs such as greed, revenge, survival, and hedonism, meaning we are governed by our thoughts, by our mind, by our will. We are governed by that. So we do not do anything beyond what we are thinking. Despite knowing the act is wrong, still they committed it. Then they must be punished. That's one of the premises of the classical school. So we are governed by our mind. We do not do things beyond from our thinking. So we know what are the consequences. So it is but right that we will be punished if we are to commit a crime. That's the idea of the classical school of crime causation. Further, it defines crime in legal terms, meaning we need to define crimes according to the laws. We do not define crime according to the interests or to the ideas of the governing people, but it be limited in the law.
So there must be a law that should define what are the crimes, just like we have the criminal law. What is the definition of criminal law? It is a branch of public law which defines crimes, treats of their nature, and provides for their punishment. So the classicalists said that there should be a criminal law that defines crime. And if that particular act is not governed by any law, it should not be punished, or he should not be punished for that action. That's why they say that nollum crimen nolla pena sine lege, or no crime without law, or meaning no crime if there is no punishment if there is no law. So there should be a law punishing that act. Otherwise, it should not be considered as a crime. Well, we are already and we are actually uh, implementing that thing in our society today. That only those punishable by law should be uh, punished by the government, not those actions, no matter how immoral the action is. If there are no laws covering or governing that act, then the person should not be punished for that action. No crime when there is no law punishing such act. What else? In the classical school, they assume the responsibility of the individual is for his voluntary conduct, meaning a person is the sole responsible, no one else. Therefore, he should be the one to be imprisoned. So it should be personal. It should not be. It should not be in behalf of that criminal. Advocated a definite penalty for its crime, just like in our criminal law today, where crimes are given with definite punishment, whether that is we call it aristo mayor, aristo minor, prison mayor, prison correctional. So there is a definite penalty for its crime. And Jeremy Bentham, or they also emphasize that the punishment to be meted should serve as a deterrent or a deterrence to other people. So you have your general and the specific deterrence. And the classical school's main principle is let the punishment fit the crime. So it is the crime that it is being punished, not the person. Okay? So something like what is happening today, that when a violator is a high-ranking government official, well, there are instances that they are not apprehended or they are not arrested because of their, we call it, status in life. So if you say, let the punishment fit the crime, meaning kay general yan, kay colonel, kay corporal yan, kay vendor yan, dapat pare-parehas yan na huliin mo because all of them committed a crime, because the crime committed should be the basis of punishment, not the status of the person. What is not true in the classical school's explanation of the causes of crime? Well, in the classical school, man is a rational being. Nag-iisip ang tao. Alam ng tao ang kanyang ginagawa. At ang tao ay gumagawa ng mga bagay-bagay according to his own volition. Okay? And man knows the consequences of his criminal acts, so he deserves to be punished. So A, B, and C, these are all true in the classical school's explanation of the causes of crime. Letter D is not, because man do not commit crime according to his instinct. When you say instinct, you are referring to the biological nature of a person. You are acting out of your biological urges. That's the idea of letter D. So that is not a classical school explanation of the causes of crime, but rather it could be part of the positive school of criminology. the biological explanation of criminal behavior. Number 9, the following are the concepts of punishment is classical school. Okay, the following are the concept of punishment in, I'm sorry, that should be in classical school, except. Okay, by the way, those who have not watched the earlier videos, you might be wondering why we have question number 8 and number 9, and I not discussed yet the earlier questions. Well, they are covered by the previous videos that I have posted. So to have an orderly understanding of my topic, it is advisable for you to watch first the earlier videos that I have posted in relation to this topic. So the following are the concepts of punishment in classical school, except. So inhumane punishment should be avoided. That's part of classical school. Degree of punishment is based upon the social status of offenders. That is wrong. Okay, so it should not be based on the social status. It should be based on the law that is violated. An act should not be punishable if there is no law punishing such act. Well, that is a classical school. And punishment is meted because the offender is responsible for his voluntary act. So letter B is not part of the classical school's concept of punishment. So what about the neoclassical? The neoclassical school, it did not came out right after the classical. Neoclassical emerged in the early 20th century or the late 19th century. Okay, so there were criticisms on the classical school. So the neoclassical school emerged to remedy some of the problems created by the classical school. And what are those criticisms? In classical school, it represents more a philosophy of justice than a theory of crime causation. So in classical school, there was no clear explanation of crime causation. So there was only a focus on the justice aspect of criminality. And there was an emphasis on the personal choice. They disregarded other reasons why a people commit a crime, just like social factors. So there was a lack of explanation of criminal motivation. And in classical school, it assumes that everyone is equally capable of making rational decision. And that is the problem according to the neoclassicalist thinkers. So the neoclassicalists, like Taylor, Walton, and Young, there was, according to them, there were contradictions in classism presented themselves in universal penal measures and in day-to-day practice. So it was impossible, according to them, in practice to ignore the determinants of human action and proceed as if punishment and incarceration could be easily measured on some kind of universal calculus, apart from throwing the work of the law itself into doubts. Example, in punishing property crime by the privation of property. Classicism appeared to contradict widely held commonsensical notions of human behavior. That human behavior is not only by our own free will. There are things, there are other motivations or other stimulations that made a person to commit a crime or to do something. There are other factors. So the neoclassical school is saying that yes, it's true that we human beings are beings of rationality and we are governed by our free will. But according to neoclassicalists, you have to consider also that there are factors that may restrain the practice of our free will. And with that, neoclassical concepts of criminality include the following, except individual responsibilities were taken into account considering the psychology and sociology of crimes. Punishment is imposed to some lawbreakers but not on others by recognition of the exemption. Varied environmental factors affect the exercise of free will. That there are situations or circumstances that make free will impossible to exercise. So what is not a concept of criminality in the neoclassical school? Well, that is letter C. Varied environmental factors affects the exercise of free will. Well,
when we speak of varied environmental factors, we are referring to, we call it the climates, we are referring to the weather, okay? So these are the list. So A, B, and D, so A, B, C, D, these are what you call, all of the answers are correct. So we have choose the best answer, okay? The best answer would be letter C, that in neoclassical school, varied environmental factors affects the exercise of free will. So they are not talking about environmental factors actually. They're talking about uh, the psychological factors, like the sanity and insanity, like the imbecile, the morons, and the idiots. Those are the factors that affects the exercise of free will, not the environmental factors. Though environmental factors may be considered as a circumstance to consider whether a person is responsible for his act or not, but that is not the main focus of the neoclassical school. The focus is on the psychological and sociological aspect of criminality, and there should be, we call it, recognition of the mitigating and exempting circumstances, as well as other circumstances that may inhibit the exercise of the free will, meaning that may stop our free will. Just like if you are drunk, um, your free will is vitiated by being drunk of liquor. Okay? So you cannot decide properly. If you're a child, you cannot decide this idea on letter D. So in neoclassical, these are the classism concentrated on the criminal act and ignored individual differences between criminals. So neoclassicalists were saying that we are not all the same. We have differences, differences of the irrationality. There are people who cannot discern what is right and what is wrong. Okay. And classicism, they held that free will is important, but that it can be constrained by physical and environmental factors. So it could be constrained, meaning it can be affected by the physical environmental factors. So what are those things? The social factors could be your childhood experience, the kind of economy that we have, the education. So all of these things, according to the neoclassicalists, should be considered as some factors that may affect the exercise of the free will. Just like what you call the physical or the environmental factors of weather and topography.
So therefore, the neoclassicalists push for the allowance or for the allowing of mitigating circumstances by looking at the situation, the physical and the social environment. Okay? So what are these things? So we have to consider the social environment that we have mentioned a while ago. We have also to consider the physical and environmental factors that somehow have affected the exercise of the free will. And what else? There should be a second look on the record of the person. If the person is a recidivist or not, or a first-time offender, then there should be a distinction on the punishment to be meted. That's just like in our laws. If you're a first-time offender, more often than not, you will be qualified for a probation. But if you are a recidivist, it may disqualify you for probation. So that's the idea. And what else? There should be a consideration for factors like incompetence, pathology, insanity, and impulsive behavior. That's now on the biological, psychological aspect of, we call it a human being or individual. These are the pictures of sociopath and psychopathic people who were convicted as serial killers in America. And they suffered or they were suffering from mental illnesses. So according to the neoclassicalists, you have to consider also that the mental illness. as a basis for the conviction of a person. And in our country today, we are applying the jima'a, the justifying, exempting, the mitigating, the aggravating, and the alternative circumstances in the uh, basis of or as basis of the punishment to be meted on the accused if found guilty. Further, the neoclassical school, they said that certain individuals, such as children and the mentally ill, are generally less capable of exercising their reason. It is a fundamental notion that let the children and the lunatic criminals be exempted from punishment, just like similar to the picture beside the text, that children are not criminals. They should not be treated as criminals because they needed help instead. That's the idea. So in neoclassical school, that particular principle was also emphasized by them, that children lunatic should be treated not similar to those people with normal rationality. What is the common concept of classical and neoclassical schools of crime causation? So the common concept meaning is that uh, both of them agree on that matter. So they agree on the free will, but they do not agree on the social factors, because in classical, those social factors are not considered. They In classical, they do not consider those individuals lacking self-restraint in the exercise of their free will. So in uh, in the classical school, recidivism should be considered on the degree of punishment uh, that is on the neoclassical. So what is common between the neoclassical and the classical is that people are governed by their free will. Now we have the passive school or the Italian school of criminology. In the passive school, all people are different and thus vary in their understanding of right and wrong, and it should be the barometer for punishment. So it's more or less similar to the neoclassical, the distinctions of people. The person and not the crime should be punished. The only problem with the classical school is that the crime is being punished, not the criminal. In passive school, there should be an emphasis on the punishment of the person, not the crime committed. Okay? So it's almost the same with the neoclassical school. Further, in passive school, they eliminated the free will explanation of criminality. Instead, in the positive school, there must be a consideration of social science or the scientific study of the society. So, positivism or positive school practically emphasizes on empirical studies or emphasizes the principle of scientific understanding of the society. That before you decide about a certain matter, you should have conducted first a research or an experiment or a scientific uh, explanation on that particular behavior before you decide. Ian Taylor, Paul Walton, and Jack Young wrote in the New Criminology for a social theory of deviance. They mention about the deterministic movement, which was consolidated by Enrico Ferri, who championed the approach then being employed by an Italian military physician, Cesare Lombroso. So Ferri was a student of Lombroso, the military physician who mentioned about conducted the observation the skulls and the physical features of those criminals as compared to the non-criminals. And he said that we can determine from the population who is most likely to commit a crime. And we can also determine the person whether he is going to commit a crime or not based on his physical appearance. So that's the idea of the positive school, particularly Cesar Lombroso, the deterministic movement. So what else? In the Italian school or the passive school, it includes the careful observation of the characteristics of criminals to gain insight into the causes of antisocial conduct or behavior. So, in passive school, Cesar Lombroso conducted empirical studies and he came up with a conclusion that there are physical stigmata that would show that a person is a criminaloid or has the tendency to commit a crime. However, Ferry did not endorse all of Lombroso's conclusion, particularly the born criminal and the atavism principle. So Ferry instead adopted the inductive method, meaning if you go back to the method, there should be a gathering of information. We gather information as what is subject matter. Then we collate, then we come up with a theory. So that's a science. First, you're going to gather information. You're going to conduct research. And then collect everything before you are going to have your theory of a crime causation. So he set out to create a science that would explain the causes of crime. So positivism involves scientific understanding of crime causation. Further, the Italian school developed in the 19th century as an attempt to apply scientific methods to the study of the criminal while rejecting the legal definition of crime, with the contribution of Cesar Lombroso and his two students, Rafael Garofalo and Enrico Ferri. So there should be a science. Before we decide, before we conclude, there must be a comprehensive study of the subject matter or on a particular criminal behavior. Okay. So the study of criminal behavior on scientific determinism, explaining the act had a cause, and that should be the basis of the passive school to determine the causes by empirical study. So Lombroso, he studied the remains of executed individuals who had been convicted of crimes and came up with a theory of born criminal. He was a military physician, so he compared now the skulls of the non-criminals and the criminals, and he concluded that criminals have a lower form of life, nearer to the ape-like ancestors than the non-criminal in traits and disposition. On the other hand, Garofalo traced the roots of criminal behavior, which is not physical, just like Lombroso. Lombroso was claiming, or Lombroso claimed that physical in nature or biological in nature. However, Garofalo, although he was a student of Lombroso as far as scientific consideration is concerned, okay, he focused on the psychological equivalence, which he called moral anomalies. So it's all about the psychological aspect, that there are people who may be suffering from mental illnesses. So he defined crime not as a violation, but as a violation of the nature, because to him, a criminal is practically suffering from a mental disease. So he pushed for judicial reform. Ferry, on the other hand, argued that criminals should not be held morally responsible for their crimes because they did not choose to commit crimes, rather were driven to commit crimes due to economic, social, and political factors. So moral responsibility. So now he's saying that they should not be punished because they are victims of the economy. They are victims of their society and their politics. And criminal justice was to afford maximum protection or defense of society against the criminal. How? Okay. By, we call it social reforms, by political reforms, by economic reforms, by penal reforms, so that the society will be protected from criminals. The three well-known personalities, Lombroso, Ferry, and Garofalo, of the positive school or Italian school of criminology, they differ in their explanation on crime causation. So they differ on that. So meron silang pagkakaiba. Ano ang kanilang agreement or ano ang kanilang commonality? Their commonality is the application of scientific method. So si Lombroso, nag-focus siya sa biological study ng mga kriminal. But Lombroso and Ferre, they focus on other factors. But they agree. The three of them agree that we should apply, or before we conclude, before we create a jury, kailangan muna ay mag-observe tayo, mag-experiment tayo. The causes of crimes are the summation of biological, psychological, physiological factors. Biological, that's more on Lombroso. Okay. Focusing the punishment, and Lombroso does not believe in psychological and sociological factors. On the other hand, Lombroso and or Ferre and Garofalo do not agree on that biological. Focusing the punishment on the offender to deter criminality, that is also on Lombroso. Attributing criminal behavior to physiological structure of man, that is also on Lombroso. Positivism, focus on the individual, may have been the greatest contribution to criminology and the CGS. Just like in the CGS, our focus is on the criminal. So in positivism, in the scientific study of the society and of criminality, somehow the criminals became the focus of criminal justice system. Classification of offenders, they came up with that, the habitual criminals and categories between insanity and sanity. It also led to the use of psychology in studying offenders and opening the way for different kinds of sentences and treatments that fit the criminal and not the crime. So, in positive school, let the punishment fit the crime. Okay, it is not the punishment fits the crime. In here, let the punishment fit the criminal. In classical, let the punishment fit the crime. So in here, it should fit the criminal because of other considerations, just like the Neoclassical school of criminology. Okay, so those are the three fundamental thoughts of crime causation. Again, if we go back, in classical school, it focuses on the classical, or it focuses on the free will, that all individual should be liable or responsible for an action. In neoclassical, it talks about the introduction of mitigating circumstances, particularly those circumstances affecting the exercise of free will. And on positive school, they have varied explanation of crime causation. It could be attributable to their genes or some social and psychological factors. But in positive school, everything should be a result of a scientific explanation or a science or a social science. So thank you very much for viewing and listening. And if you have not subscribed yet this channel, you may click the subscribe button and notification bell. Okay, so thank you once again. God bless you all.